ugly against Oklahoma. But let's take a look at those BCS standings. As I mentioned, Florida's still #1 in the land, but Texas leapfrogs Alabama, who did not play last week. That's probably the most significant reason why. Iowa #4, Cincinnati Bearcats #5, who look to have smooth sailing in the Big East, except for that game at Pitt at the end of the season, which should be an interesting one. TCU, Boise State, Oregon, LSU, Georgia Tech. Peter's third team. I don't know how many teams they're allowed to have. I think 2 is enough, but his third team there at #10 in the BCS. ACC getting some representation there. Let's talk about LSU and Alabama. LSU going to Alabama to play this week. Scott, I heard you mention before the show, this game might not even matter.
I really
Why
think
is
so.
that?
As long as Alabama plays LSU close, they might lose. Let's say they fall to, they probably fall to 5th. Iowa and Cincinnati would jump them, I think, as long as they have a really good game. They're going to get a chance either way because LSU is not even in their division of the SEC to play Florida for the SEC championship game. They win that against the #1 team in the country. I could definitely see them leapfrogging Iowa and Cincinnati, who have not been impressive to the pollsters. So yeah, I really don't think it matters if Alabama loses this game.
That's interesting. I mean, you're choosing a one-loss BCS team when there's plenty of good one-loss BCS teams and plenty of undefeated non-BCS teams, and of course Cincinnati and Iowa, as we've mentioned. I'm not so sure I agree with you, Scott, but it's really going to be interesting. I think this season might be one of those seasons that really shows the need for a playoff. If past seasons haven't done that, this season might be it.
Well, for as much as I would like to devote every subsequent episode and the rest of this to BCS bashing, we have to go to commercial break. But on the other hand, after the break, we'll talk about Michigan bashing. Welcome back to Varsity Blues. Alex Prasad, Scott Wagner, Peter Saul, Michigan football. Let's talk about where we thought the team stood just a couple weeks ago, guys. We all made picks, Peter, on the last time that you were here, just following the Iowa game. This is what was left on the slate: Delaware State, Penn State, at Illinois, and then against Purdue, the soft underbelly, if you will, of the Michigan football schedule. And then at Wisconsin and Ohio State. I was not that optimistic. I thought the team would go 7-5, but I figured that was the low end, the low water mark. And you see right there, Scott just loved Michigan after the Iowa game. Peter still liked Michigan a fair amount. Of course, we're all wrong on the Illinois game, all correct on Penn State, all correct on Delaware State.
I think 666 as a team is not anything to be ashamed of.
Perhaps, but now, of course, looking at the rest of the season, guys, this Purdue game becomes a must-win, as games at Wisconsin and against Ohio State, certainly coin tosses anyhow, and Michigan's still sitting at 5 wins. Of course, they had 4 in the first 4 weeks of the season. So let's take this time, take a deep breath, and ask ourselves some deep questions. The first being, Peter, was Michigan's loss against Illinois a strategic loss, or was it a tactical one? And by that I mean, is this a condemnation of what Rich Rod has done here in these first 2 years, or is this an aberration and just a game to kind of write off as?
Well, which answer is which? No, I'm just kidding. Wait, what? No, it's I believe this was a tactical loss. It comes down to the plays chosen on the ground and how they were executed by the players. But yeah, you wonder about these continuing trends in Rich Rod's career. I feel like we talk about the same things every week: bad execution, turnovers, poor secondary, poor linebacker, and you wonder, when are these ever going to be improved?
Rich Rodriguez had a tremendous track record of positive turnover differential at West Virginia, Scott. What's your level of comfort with the Rich Rod regime at this point in time? I mean, it's getting more uncomfortable, even for the most patient Michigan football fan.
I mean, there's a couple ways to answer this question. The first one is whether I like what's been going on the past couple of years, which obviously is no. But the second question, the underlying question is, can we give him the axe yet? Which I can't see happening at least this year, and you got to give him at least 3 years. Because let's be honest, they don't have the best talent in there right now. Michigan usually historically would have at least, 4 first-round picks somewhere across the whole team. And you look at it now, it's hard to argue they have more than Brandon Graham really on their team. So they're not playing with great talent. Sure, the coaching has been suspect, and I've talked about that before, and you can't put it all on the players. But the players have not totally lived up to the the expectations of what you would expect for a Michigan football team.
Now, how about Greg Robinson, Peter? Greg Robinson hired into Michigan after a dismal tenure at Syracuse as their head football coach. Had a decent track record in the NFL as a defensive coordinator. Certainly he knows his stuff. Is it too quick to assume that Greg Robinson is Scott Schaefer?
Well, it's hard to tell. Obviously, I think you have to give him another year just so we don't have 3 defensive coordinators in 3 years.
Right.
Or, 4 defensive coordinators in 4 years. So
right.
You can't give him the X just yet, I believe, because we have to see if his scheme can hold on. It's just really hard to tell. Is it the players, as Scott mentioned, a lack of talent overall really on this team, or is it the coaches? And there's just so many questions about these past 2 seasons. It's really hard to tell. Who do we blame? Who do we praise? It's difficult.
Difficult questions, but perhaps these tough questions need to be answered, Scott. This Michigan defense repeated, itself over these last 2 Illinois games. Is this a Greg Robinson problem in your opinion, or perhaps it's a linebackers coach problem? I don't know.
Yeah, it's baffling because it's not as if Greg Robinson is Scott Schaefer. Scott Schaefer's hiring was severely questioned because his only experience was as a defensive coordinator at Stanford. Greg Robinson has coached in the NFL. He's coached at Texas. He's coached at some big-name places before, and he's proved that he knows what he's doing. But he sure hasn't proved it this year because there's been a lot of questions as far as the play calling and where the defenses are lined up on certain plays. So I'm not happy with the way Greg Robinson's going. But as I was saying with Rich Rod and as I would agree with Peter, is that you got to give him a little more time because you got to let him set his system up because maybe, similar as we were talking about this, about the offense last year, maybe they hadn't opened up the playbook. Maybe that's what has to go on with Greg Robinson. Maybe he needs another year to really fully integrate what he wants to do.
Right. The only problem with that was a comparison I was making earlier in the year. Perhaps the defense is the year 1, and the progress between year 1 and year 2 is always greatest. But the progress between year 1 and year 2 with the offense through 5-6 weeks looked like it was significant, and at this point it's starting to look suspect. I suppose they are moving the ball this year, which they didn't do last year, but they're certainly not executing it. Well, finally, let's move on to this Purdue game, guys, and we could talk X's and O's. We could talk about how good Michigan's offense is against Purdue's defense and vice versa. But we're going to keep this at the macro level, if you will. And we'll start with you, Scott. Is this Purdue game a program-defining game for Michigan football going forward? If they lose this game, it seems unlikely they'll win either of their last 2.
Yeah.
And bowl game is maybe out of the question.
Yeah, well, sort of the recurring theme for me here is what goes on this year should not define what goes on for the following year. This is a season-defining game. If they lose this one, they're done. They're going 5-7. But even if they do lose this one, I think still give them a couple more years.
Peter, quickly.
Score, we're going to win.
Optimistic, Scott. Do you think they'll win?
I think they're going to win. Purdue's not a very good team. Illinois is not a very good team either, but it's at home. They'll turn it around.
The question is Michigan a good team? Hopefully we'll find out next week on Varsity Blue. Before we talk about